What up, Wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy. He's here. We're from Mtg. We like it of Magic. As a matter of fact, I like it of Magic so much that I even like Strixhaven. And it's along those lines that I think we need to sit down today and have a little discussion.
They say a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. Well, with God as my witness, I am that fool.
So, Strixhaven came out, didn't it? In case you didn't notice, and I guess I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, because it's been out on Arena for about 2 weeks now, and it's been out in paper for about a week, and everybody hates it. It seems to be the consensus. You hate it, don't you? That's why you clicked on this video. I hate Strixhaven. Let's see what this idiot has to say. And I get it. Look, you're probably right, internet person who doesn't like Strixhaven very much. Ziggy, your butt is just up in the air. I think that's all they can see. You want to show them the front half? There we go. Yeah, it's not. I don't just have like a disembodied cat butt. Oh, you're slipping. You're slipping on my pajama pants there, bud. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, here's where we were. I was going to start the video by acknowledging some hard truths to maybe get some credibility points with some of the people who are maybe a little bit more pragmatic about Strixhaven, or at least that's how they'd put it. But there are at least a few things that we probably need to go ahead and acknowledge before I move on to talking about why I think Strixhaven is good, actually. Here's why Strixhaven is not. In fact, that's why you clicked on the video, is the same talking points you've heard about why Strixhaven sucks. But I do want to go ahead and get some of these arguments out of the way, just so you know that I'm not some kind of like delusional Strixhaven stan. I don't think there's that many of those on the internet, right? But I'm certainly not one of them. And I acknowledge that this set has some issues. So let me go ahead and get some of these out of the way. Even though I don't know that I fully agree with point 3, I will almost immediately attempt to debunk point 3. But I can't talk about point 3 until I talk about the first two. That's how you make a YouTube video. But the first thing I want to just go ahead and get out there on Front Street, I acknowledge that this set is largely devoid of like huge bomby build around cards that form the basis of entirely new decks just all on their own. And this set is also bereft of, overpowered self-contained mechanics that form the basis of whole new decks by themselves, like cycling or rogues or adventures. But I'll touch on more of that later. Just the point of this first argument is that, yeah, I know there's not a whole lot of super exciting, big, splashy cards with dumb effects that might get banned. I know that. Argument B, Mystical Archives seem to be a tacit admission that maybe this set is not a great standard set. So here's some Commander stuff. If you're playing in paper, it might be collectible. That art looks cool, doesn't it? Man, it's going to be worth something in 10 years because this has such a low print run. And as far as, when you're collecting the packs on Arena, oh, you can play Historic now with these crazy cards. Aren't there a bunch of bombs in the Mystical Archives? And aren't you excited to play Historic? That's the marketing strategy there. So in some ways it feels like Mystical Archives are, again, a tentative admission that, like, look, we know the set's not great for Standard, but, like, hey, you get a masterpiece in, like, every pack effectively, so buy the set. It certainly screams that, doesn't it? I'll acknowledge that. And C, the one that I agree with the least and will like immediately attempt to push back on in the next section. This set has not yet affected Standard, at least on a large level, and probably, there's the qualifier, probably won't until rotation. If at all. You see how layered this statement is? If at all are 3 words I really don't want to add here, because I do think that Strixhaven probably will affect the meta, especially a lot more after rotation, when it's a freaking free-for-all. We have no idea what's going to happen, right? So, but at least up until rotation, it looks like, unless there's something, crazy in the D&D set or something like that, like the last set before rotation, that, boosts some of the Strixhaven cards for whatever reason. It doesn't look like Strixhaven's going to splash in a Standard too much. And I think that the words on a large scale are doing a lot of heavy lifting in this sentence, because I think that Strixhaven has already affected Standard in some ways. But again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, astute viewers will notice that all of those critiques apply pretty specifically to the Standard environment, and that is the perspective from which most people are judging Strixhaven. It makes sense. I have no qualms with that. It's a Standard set. You expect it to affect Standard at least somewhat, but it does beg an important question to ask.
Yeah, I'm feeling rich, and I'm finally about to cash out.
That's right. What do you want from a Magic set exactly, right? Now, I know that, and again, I'm the Standard guy around here. Of all the, like, non-pro MTG YouTubers, I am one of the most like standard centric on this entire set. You would think it would really bum me out if the set didn't affect standard that much, but we'll get to standard in just a moment. But I also want to say that like there are a lot of really good commander cards in this set, and from what I hear, I haven't really gotten to experience much of the limited environment yet. I've done one draft. I haven't really experienced much of the limited environment. But from what I hear, the reviews for Strixhaven Limited are wild. People so far seem to really, really like this limited environment. Again, just from the buzz that I've been hearing. So again, just a great limited set. Pretty decent collector set, if that matters to you. And a set with a fair number of cool commander playables too. Of course, you're probably still saying, but you know, Dev, I really like my standard, and that's why I watch your channel, is I'm a standard Magic player, right? So when a set doesn't affect standard, that means I'm just looking at emergent ultimatums and rogues and whatnot for the next, 3 months till I wait for another set out to come out, and it's a massive bummer, and I completely understand that. But I'll argue in this section, this is where I push back on my earlier point, that Strixhaven has, to an extent, affected standard already in a number of ways. There's kind of like a lot of cards to list in this section, more than you might think. Elite Spellbinder, we all knew that card was good, but it's in a lot of versions of Mono White, and it's in the Boris Winota deck, and Winota's back on the menu, I guess, because of Strixhaven. Winota wasn't really an important standard deck until this set came out, but it picked up Elite Spellbinder and Blade Historian, which was a ridiculous rip to get off of Winota Trigger in the first place. So, just a couple of cards from Strixhaven made a whole deck, relevant again. And Elite Spellbinder is really important, not only in those two decks, but also in like Black-White Tempo and Humans builds that are getting a small foothold on the format right now. So those are a couple of cards that are fairly important. But here's one you probably didn't know about. Hall Monitor. Hall Monitor is seeing play in Mono Red? Go to MTG Melee and check out the last few tournaments. Especially the newest results from the Strixhaven 5K qualifier over at Channel Fireball, and you will see that just about every version of Mono Red, I think it was 8 out of 10 builds that I saw, they're all playing 2 to 3 copies of Hall Monitor, a card that I think a lot of us missed during the set review. There are also copies of Professor Onyx and Quandrix Cultivator in Emergent Ultimatum decks nowadays. A lot of them, it turns out. Up to 4 copies of Cultivator. I remember sitting on stream trying to convince my chat that there was something about Cultivator that I really liked, and a lot of people were like, Solemn Simulacrum's better. And I was like, but this can trade. It can just brick wall aggro and get you an untapped land when it comes into play. But there was still people like, no, it's bad. But no, it has immediately found its way into pretty much the best deck in the format. So there is that. And Professor Onyx is often a silver bullet, 2 of at the most, but she's good in some board states to search up with an Emergent Ultimatum, or if you draw her late, she helps you grind the game out with the Magecraft ability, drawing cards and stuff. So it makes sense that a one-of Professor Onyx would go in the deck. But just in case you didn't know, those are 2 more Strixhaven cards that are affecting the meta at the moment, but there's more. Test of Talents is in pretty much every sideboard that can carry blue right now, replacing a copy or 2 of Negate or Disdainful Stroke here or there. You've got Decisive Denial in Teamer sideboards and even in some Teamer main decks right now. And you'll see Fracture and Vanishing Verse in Esper Yorion sideboards, and even again, sometimes in the main deck, you'll see a couple of copies of Vanishing Verse. So that's a lot of cards that are affecting Standard in some form or another at the moment. And I know this doesn't count much, but I can't go on Arena without seeing like Dina or Plum the Forbidden or Sedgemoor Witch or some combination of all 3 of those cards. They're kind of everywhere. So that's been my play experience for the last couple of weeks. I cannot get away from Sedgemoor freaking Witch. So, in some ways, this set has affected Standard both anecdotally for me and, in a more sort of empirical way. We have data that shows that there are at least like 10 cards from Strixhaven that are showing up in important Standard decks. However, the perception, and I've Magic Coffee just appeared in my hand. The perception is that the set is just like completely weak and is not really affecting Standard in any way. It's not putting cards into Standard whatsoever. And I think that there's a fairly specific reason why we, and I mean we, myself included, as Magic players, think that way nowadays when it comes to evaluating Standard. Smothered and covered like I'm some hash browns. Okay, so Rogues and Cycling and Adventures are 3 things I want to talk about right now. But I mean, there have been mechanics in Standards before that have taught us to kind of, I think this way. Energy is a good example from Kaladesh block. Energy's a great example, actually. There have been mechanics. It's usually mechanics. Sometimes it can be sub-themes like rogues, for instance, that can cause us to think this way. But a lot of these are self-contained, you know? Cycling is a relatively important deck in Standard right now. Cycling ain't going to pick up any cards. It's just not going to pick up any cards. Rogues is a really important deck in Standard right now. It's not going to pick up any cards unless they print a rogue, and preferably that rogue needs to have flash, and preferably it needs to have a relatively low mana cost so it can go in the lowest version of the deck, which is by far the most played version of the deck. So you see how we've pigeonholed new additions to rogues into a very, very tiny box they absolutely must fit in, and almost no cards are going to fit into that box, right? Adventures decks, you know, Genesis Adventures, we sometimes call it. I sometimes call it. The deck that has, you know, Brazen Borrower, Beanstalk Giant, Bone Crusher Giant, Goldspan Dragon, Genesis Ultimatum, and like a couple of other cards, right? Like, look how tight that deck list is. It also has to play Cultivate a lot of the time. Sometimes it plays Shark Typhoon. Sometimes on the low end, it'll play things like Scorching Dragonfire and whatnot even. So it's a relatively loose deck list when it comes to like 4 slots, but it's not going to pick up anything, because the card that it would be looking for would be so hyper-specific that it's going to be tough to find exactly the kind of card that Teamer Adventures wants to cut 4 cards for. Same thing with Emergent Ultimatum. It's kind of a miracle that Emergent Ultimatum is cutting cards to fit cards from Strixhaven. Again, it's something we didn't really expect them to do in the first place, and that's because even though some of these decks are 80-card Yorion piles, they're still extremely tight deck lists at the moment that have almost no room for evolution outside of, you know, strictly or marginally better versions of cards they already have. So I guess my point here is that Strixhaven was, in a way, set up to fail. You know, it's not going to add anything to rogues because that deck list is incredibly tight, and if it was going to add something, it would have to be this uber-specific, you know, card they don't already have access to. It's not going to add anything to Adventures. It's not going to add anything, much at least, to Ultimatum decks. It's not going to create whole new decks in this environment because we already have these ultra powerful or just like ultra synergistic decks that have very established game plans. So in a way, Strixhaven it's kind of a tough sell for Strixhaven to be able to break into too many already established, extremely tight deck lists, or form a brand new, you know, super powerful tier 1 deck in the face of all of these, you know, very established decks. And that kind of leads to a reality where it's probably not going to affect Standard immediately, like as soon as it comes out, right? I know it's been a couple of weeks on Arena at this point, but we are seeing a little bit of evolution in the meta, just a teensy tiny bit, you know? And a matter of fact, one of the best evolutions in the meta, I think, kind of serves as an interesting example when we're looking at Strixhaven as a set, right? Because, again, we can't always expect every set to affect the meta immediately, and we especially can't expect every card in the set to affect the meta immediately. Often we have to wait on rotation, which is what the next segment of this video is about, but I do want to point out that, you know, we've already seen Magda, Brazen Outlaw, from Kaldheim, just recently become an important card in the meta. In case you weren't clued in on this, and yeah, this means something, I'll come around on it. But in case you didn't know about this, as of about 5 or 6 days ago as I record this, Gruul has a completely new face, you know? It doesn't play the Brushfire Elementals with the Kazandu Mammoths anymore. It plays Magda, Brazen Outlaw, and Asika's Chariot. Asika's Chariot's basically the top of its curve alongside Goldspan Dragon now. And Magda Brazen Outlaw was a card that, you know, was on my top 20 Kaldheim list. I expected it to do some things, and it just didn't really do anything for like 3 months, right? Now, suddenly, Gruul is a tier 1 deck again that won, you know, or placed very highly in a bunch of different tournaments last weekend. It's now number 1 Mythic, or at least, again, as of the recording of this video. This Gruul deck that I'm talking about is number 1 Mythic in constructed Standard at the moment. So, you know, Magda is an interesting card because Magda is kind of the premier 2-drop in this new form of Gruul, and no one played Magda for like 3.5 months, despite people thinking like, oh, this could be a good card. It just really didn't break its way into the meta for months, and people had written it off and all that, you know. I think people were just more or less ready to move on from trying this card because people assumed that this card had already been tried and had kind of failed the standard litmus test. But no, it turns out that, Magda was actually pretty good all along, right? Really helps Gruul kind of cut its speed a little bit, which is important for getting underneath ultimatums and whatnot. There's a lot of reasons why the deck wants a card like Magda. The extra mana production is really important. There's a lot of stuff the deck does with its mana. So, again, not surprised that Magda ultimately did something, but it took 3 months, over 3 months for Magda to do anything. So, again, I wouldn't be surprised if there were cards from Strixhaven that took that long. But just in case nothing in Strixhaven has the same story as Magda in a few months, there is something coming up here. It's not really soon, but it's coming. It's coming this year. That may greatly affect how we perceive Strixhaven.
Glass clown, stash crowns till I pass out.
We finally come to the elephant in the womb, which would be more noticeable than an elephant in a room. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. And that's rotation, right? I mean, I don't know why I was going to start with Theros. Theros is rotating. Oh my god. But Throne of Eldraine is rotating. Ikoria is rotating. Theros is rotating. M21's rotating. And we lose a bunch of cards, y'all. I mean, you know that. But rotation's really going to shake things up. And when we talk every day about how powerful Throne is and how powerful the companion mechanic is, and just for a second, just think of all the things we're going to lose. Just think we're going to lose the ultimatums. Both important ultimatums people play right now. Lose companions. We're going to lose Ugin, the Spirit Dragon, if that matters to you. Shark Typhoon, Embercleave, the Great Hinge, Edgewall Innkeeper, Bone Crusher, Brazen Borrower. We're going to lose a bunch of rogues. We don't lose Soaring Thought Thief and a couple of other things. We do lose Thieves Guild Enforcer. We lose Into the Story, which effectively just completely kneecaps the rogue deck. It's not going to be anywhere near as good without Into the Story. So there's that. We also leave important removal like Heartless Act and Eliminate, Extinction Event. There's just a million cards that are currently forming the basis of what we know of as standard Magic that are all going to be out the door. So, again, we don't perceive Strixhaven to be a very powerful set on landing, but maybe when the next rotation after this one happens and Strixhaven leaves, we will shed a tear for a set we've come to appreciate. We'll see. I mean, some of the best standard cards of all time. They're taking the trash outside my house. I don't know if you can hear it. It's a really loud truck. But anyway, some of the most powerful standard cards of all time have had to wait on a rotation. I almost used this example when I was talking about Magda, but Magda didn't have to wait on a rotation. That said, Rally the Ancestors did have to wait on rotation. In case you weren't around when Fate Reforged came out, everyone hated Fate Reforged too. A lot of people said it was a garbage Magic set, and that originally had Ugin the Spirit Dragon in it. So we had a meta you couldn't play Ugin. It just wasn't going to happen. Although I guess Ugin's not super important in tournament Magic right now for the most part, but he is a scourge on Arena. He's a scourge on Arena. But when Fate Reforged came out, that set got knocked back and forth, and Rally the Ancestors, as a specific example, was like a 50 cents to $1 card for a while. But then BFZ came out, and when BFZ came out, really when Magic Origins came out, the next set that came out, Magic Origins had Nantuko Husk in it, which makes Rally the Ancestors better. And then BFZ came out and had Zulaport Cutthroat in it, and a couple of other things. Catacomb Sifter, some important cards for the deck. But Zulaport Cutthroat coming out and supporting Rally the Ancestors, and Nantuko Husk coming out to support Rally the Ancestors, made that card probably the best card in the standard environment for 3 months. No one could stop Rally the Ancestors for a really long time, but it was a card that no one cared about for 6 months after it came out. It didn't wholly redeem Fate Reforged as a set or anything, but it is an example that I want to keep in mind, because there could be plenty of cards from Strixhaven that once they get the support, or once hate cards leave the format, it could be any number of factors, suddenly Strixhaven's looking a lot better. Which brings me to, I don't know, is it the most important point to make in this video? It might be. Anyway, here's the title card for it.
Bass, trout, lobster on my plate.
Context. In case you're listening to the video, you didn't see the title card. Context is key, always in every situation. I don't think that enough people take proper context into account just on a daily basis outside of Magic the Gathering. Especially in the community, we seem to have a problem with people, and it's not always content creators, sometimes it's Reddit users or Twitter users or whatever, who just make the craziest, just out of left field statements. I've heard multiple content creators and like social media users basically with this take that like Strixhaven is the worst standard set of all time. And like, what? Like, there's context for that, you know? Like, there's Homelands. There's Prophecy. Standard was a real format when Prophecy came along. Oh, everyone hated Mercadian Masks. And Mercadian Mask had the context of being right after one of the most powerful blocks of all time, Urza's block. And we had Mercadian Masks, and a bunch of people were like, oh, this set's boring. It doesn't really affect Standard. It's a bad set. I think I'm going to leave and not play this game anymore. And it's like, do you remember a year ago when a bunch of people left because the set was too powerful? And now people are leaving because the set's not powerful enough. And Prophecy was terrible. Like, Prophecy is maybe the most, like, ragged-on Magic set of all time outside of Homelands and Fallen Empires, which are just memes at this point. But anyway, in the modern era, we've got stuff like Battle for Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch. Do you remember how much everyone hated those sets? Like, Battle had good cards like Zulaport Cutthroat in it and stuff. Like, there were other amazing cards in Battle, don't get me wrong. I mean, you had Eldrazi in Battle. But, like, people still were not very impressed by that set. Ditto, and even more so, Oath of the Gatewatch, a set that, like, most people thought was like kind of boring and not good enough. So, like in the modern era, we've had this. Do y'all remember Dragon's Maze? Everyone thought Dragon's Maze was like the literal worst standard set of all time. And that really wasn't that long ago, again, in context. Oh yeah, and Rivals of Ixalan. That's the other one. I had to look at my phone for that one. Yeah, Rivals of Ixalan is another one. Like all of Ixalan block outside of maybe Search for Azcanta. Everyone's like, this is terrible. That had the context of coming right after another one of the more powerful blocks like ever. I mean, didn't it go Kaladesh Amonkhet Rivals or Kaladesh Amonkhet Ixalan? And how do you follow Kaladesh Amonkhet? Even though, like, on the subject of Amonkhet, super well-loved plane, everyone wants to go back, apparently. But Hour of Devastation was a set that, like, everyone thought was a Garbo set when it first came out, too. Outside of the Scarab God, like, there really wasn't much in that set that saw a whole lot of standard play. And that, I think, is actually one of the more salient points that I can make in this video, is that there were a lot of sets throughout Magic's middle history that only put, like, 5 or 6 cards into standard. Period. You know, I've said before, multiple times, both on the channel and on the Twitch streams, that maybe the best piece of advice, the piece of advice that changed my mindset about Magic the most that I've ever received, was my buddy Andy, who told me that, you know, Devin, it's my friends call me my actual name, Devin, 95% of Magic cards are bad. It's about finding that 5%. And that was especially true back then when complexity was way down, at least relative to what it is now, right? So complexity was way down. Most cards are meant for limited play and not much else. And even the cards meant for limited play are not complex. You know, you get 3 mana, 3/4s and stuff. That's about all the card does. So it was true. And it still is to an extent that 95% of Magic cards aren't meant to see standard play. You know, back in the day, if a set put 10 cards into standard, that was a massive success. And I feel like we've gotten sort of away from that evaluation of Magic. I don't know what kind of expectations we have sometimes, and I know some people are probably going to get mad at that. I'm not talking about you, but let me put it that way. But no, sometimes I think our expectations are a little bit out of whack because I've been playing Magic for 25 years, and I got to tell you, there have been many sets that didn't really put that much into standard. So, like, the idea that this is the worst standard set of all time is just like, since it's sensationalism. Not to mention revisionism, honestly. I mean, as a community, we have, again, recently lived through sets that affected standard less, at least on an immediate basis. I mean, again, we have the context of sets that have come and gone from standard. They've spent their entirety in standard and didn't really place that many cards in the meta at any given time, whereas Strixhaven's been out for 2 weeks. We have absolutely no context for what this set is going to do yet, and we're already like, this is the worst standard set I've ever seen. Come on, man. And again, I have to bring it back to sort of the beginning of the video there. At least it feels like the beginning of the video. I think I've been sitting here on this couch talking for a while. But what exactly, like, do you want from a standard set? Because I see so many people out of one side of their mouth say, Eldraine is extremely powerful and it chokes Standard, right? And then simultaneously say, Strixhaven is a weak set and I hate it. So not every set's going to be Innistrad, right? I mean, I was going to say not every set's going to be Throne of Eldraine, but that's good. I think we can all agree that every set shouldn't be as powerful as Throne of Eldraine, because look at the problems that set is causing. Look at all the cards that have had to be banned from Throne of Eldraine. Not every set should be Throne of Eldraine, and we wouldn't want that. But more pragmatically, more realistically, not every set can be Innistrad. And I'm using Innistrad as an example because I think that generally the consensus from the community is that Innistrad is a near perfect set in terms of power level and flavor, setting, all of that. I think that most people have a special place in their heart for Innistrad. And not every set is going to thread the needle like that. And again, I don't want to simp for Wizards or anything like that, because at the end of the day, I want to make this very clear. I want to make this very, very clear. At the end of the day, it's not your fault. And it's in some ways, it is on Wizards to market the set. It is on Wizards to make you excited for the set. And it is on Wizards to design cards in such a way that they affect Standard and get you excited to play new decks or, put them into new decks. So honestly, if the set doesn't affect Standard immediately and that, kneecaps your excitement for the set, that is ultimately on Wizards and not on you. But I do want to also say, to finish up my thought from earlier, that it's really difficult to thread the needle. A perfect set only happens once in a great while. So I'm not saying, eat the poop or anything, but, a set like Strixhaven is going to happen every now and again. And even though it doesn't put any huge, bomby, flashy cards, it is kind of fulfilling the role of a typical middle or end set in a given block, right? Like, it's providing the answers, mostly in the form of uncommon removal and counter spells and other stuff that affects the board state or the game state, rather than giving us whole new flashy dumb mechanics to build decks around, or giving us whole big stupid flashy cards that are obviously overpowered to build decks around. It didn't go that route. A lot of, Journey into Nyx is a good example. Avacyn Restored is a good example. There are a lot of these sets that use a middle or end set, or a lot of blocks that use a middle or end set to kind of, again, provide efficient answers to existing problems in the meta. That's kind of what we got, right? We got Test of Talents, we got Vanishing Verse, we got a couple of other important removal pieces, Rip Apart, Fracture. There's a lot of uncommon level and even some rare levels answers in this set, and there have been a lot of sets that essentially served that function. And I think looking at Strixhaven through that lens, does this set provide good, uncommon, efficient answers? And I think it does. And looking at it through that lens, I think it's mostly a success in the Standard environment, even with what little information we have about its effect on Standard at the moment. And I know, like Test of Talents and Vanishing Verse, Baleful Mastery, Mortality Spear, Rip Apart. Like, some of these cards are not the most exciting cards in the world. Quandrix Cultivator, Hall Monitor. These are not the most exciting cards in the world, but there have to be sets sometimes that have role players in them, answers in them. And again, maybe I'm a nerd, but I've said a million times, like, I'm a removal nerd. So when I see a set that has, Decisive Denial and Vanishing Verse and Fracture and Rip Apart and Test of Talents, like, I get excited about that set because, like, I think that those things are just as necessary from a gameplay and design perspective as your big, dumb, game-winning ultimatums are. As a matter of fact, I think they're even more important. Can we just stop doing that thing where we judge a set based solely on the impact it has on Standard immediately? Can we stop doing? Can we give the set some time to breathe? Can we let some other sets come out and see how well the cards in that set work with the cards in this set? And then maybe there's some synergies there. Can we stop with the set is terrible because it doesn't immediately impact my favorite format, and Standard's my favorite format. That's coming from me. That's called objectivity. So, those are my thoughts. Those are my thoughts on Strixhaven at the moment, at least. I don't know why I feel like I have to defend it. Actually, I do know why. It's because I hate reactionary talk, and I feel like so much of the takes on Strixhaven in the last couple of weeks have been very reactionary. And I don't love that. I've said before a lot of times, I'm the kind of guy that likes to wait for empirical data to base my opinions on. And there were so many people before even one tournament had happened. There were otherwise responsible content creators that were like, this is the worst set I've ever seen. It's just, what are you doing? You don't know. We still don't know. So, I don't know. That just bugs the crap out of me. And I think that was like one of the major reasons I made this video. Honestly, is can we all cool it with the thing where we just say like, is it thumbs up or thumbs down, Gladiator? Does the set immediately affect standard? No. Like, I hate it forever. Like can we stop with that? Can we not do that anymore? I would like that. But anyway, that's I think I've gotten all my thoughts out. It was probably a jumbled mess of gish-gallopy garbage, but I hope it was somewhat salient and I was able to make some points. But that's how I feel about Strixhaven. I don't think it's a great set. I don't think it's a great set. I also think the majority of hyperbolic takes I've seen on it so far bugged the living crap out of me, and it made me have to say something in its defense. This isn't my baby or anything. I don't care that much about it. But when I start seeing sensationalist reactionary takes, again, not only from content creators, but from like the Magic community on Reddit and Twitter and stuff, like I want us to be a community of reasonable people who come to conclusions based on evidence and data. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not going to go too much farther than that. I'm not calling out any specific content creators. I know you think that I am calling out some specifically, but I've seen so many make these comments that there's no one that I'm calling out at this point. But anyway, that's it for this one. I think this one's gone on long enough, right? If you want more of this kind of vlog, news, thoughts, this content, let me know down there in the comment section. I know a lot of people appreciate this content, and I don't make it enough, even though I have thoughts, right? But if you enjoyed this kind of content, this format, let me know, and I'll try to crank out a few more kind of like this, just whenever I have more thoughts. Because sometimes when I have thoughts about what's going on in the Magic community, I have this like imposter syndrome thing where people are like, nobody cares what you think. But I think like 5 of you do, so maybe I should be making these videos. But when it came to Strixhaven, I couldn't sit around and not let there be like some kind of voice for, I don't know, what I think is reason. But of course that's my perspective. Everyone thinks they're the voice of reason, right? So I could be wrong. I fully acknowledge that, but that's all I got for now. Just, do all the YouTube stuff. Like it, share it around if you want more people to see it. And of course hit subscribe and then the bell for the notifications. We got a lot of stuff coming out, deck techs, tier lists, blah, blah. You know what we do around here. So just sub if you haven't been around in a while, come back. Sub at the bell for the notifications. Check out the Patreon if you want to vote on what content we do around here. Twice a week we do polls. And just for $1 a month, you get to affect the course of YouTube history. Pretty good deal, in my opinion. But aside from that, you can watch me play Magic instead of just talk about it on Twitch at twitch.tv/spmtgdev, link in the description. And there's other links in the description down there to deck techs and other content that we've done. So check out, just hit show more down there and look at the links, and there's more content for you. You'll like something. But anyway, I'm done for now. Just let me know what you think. I'm going to get a lot of people in the comments that are just like, I hate Strixhaven, it's terrible, and you're dumb, right? But if you have a more nuanced take, please feel free to share it with us down there. I'm all ears. But anyway, I'm done for now. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.